Welcome back, you guys. So this is going to be the third Wise podcast. Just want to say in advance, thank you so much for all the support on our first two podcast episodes.
Yes,
we
and really thank you for the support on this episode.
Yes, and thank you for this one as well.
You're already doing great.
Yes. So we want to initially apologize for missing last week. We're all out of town because of spring break and Easter, and we're gonna, up front, we're probably gonna miss next week as well because of finals week. There's too much going on with school and with family.
Endgame.
And Avengers Endgame, of course. Go and see that to get the podcast done. So we're going to get this one done. We might miss next week, probably. And then after that, we should be getting these out weekly. We're going to commit to getting them out weekly.
After that, yeah.
Right. So today's episode is basically going to be about podcasts themselves. I know Jake doesn't want to talk about this one, but I do.
It's not my favorite topic, and I just want to say this real quick before we get into it. I think that the podcast itself is going to have kind of like varying topics, and it's not just going to be super serious, and it's not just going to be like on entertainment and storytelling. Is because we're both picking different topics, and so this is one of the ones that Jack picked, and so the ones that I'm going to pick are going to be more serious in nature and more like research focused, and I think yours are going to have a lot more to do with like people's day-to-day experiences and things like that.
Yeah a lot more would do with the internet and with entertainment and with day-to-day like social media, that sort of thing.
I like the variation, but I mean, I know some people are like, why might be thinking, why are you doing a silly one and then a serious one and back to silly? If they're serious, or they might be
so let us know if y'all like that, actually.
Definitely drop a comment.
Cool. All right, so I'll go ahead and start. So podcasts themselves, it's a lot more of my notes are going to be kind of off the cuff. I have looked up a couple things.
Right.
But I would like to split it into like positive and negatives for what they essentially are. So under positives, I basically put that, it can be audio or video content or both, right? So it can, well, I guess not, but it can't just be video. But it can be audio or video. It's very transportable like music, and it is typically much more informative and long form.
Audio and or video. No, not necessarily video, but you can have video.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on page.
Like us. And it has the benefit of having lots of content. So if you really want to deep dive into a topic, like let's say you like planes, I don't know, and then you go onto a podcast about planes, you're going to hear a lot about planes. More than you would if you sit in a pilot's class maybe, or sit in a just anything day to day. Podcasts typically have a lot of very specific information in a long period of time, and it provides other people's inputs and viewpoints. So the whole point is that you're in a very intimate one-on-one setting. The typical formula is two people, microphone setup, that you listen to a conversation.
We have the typical setup.
We do have the typical setup.
Yes.
So here's where the negatives come in. They can be boring sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Typically, when it comes to watch time, especially if you look at really popular ones like Joe Rogan or some other ones, it's either skip to the part that I want to see or the first 5 minutes. And people that typically do podcasts have kind of learned this and gotten highlights, and so they'll pick parts and throw up compilations of like a week or something like that of the parts that people are really interested in and not the scuffle to get to it. You also, as a listener, could have the tendency of tuning out or losing focus. That really depends on what you're doing, though. But for me, I know that when I listen to podcasts, it's typically I'm either playing video games or driving.
Or walking.
Yeah, or walking. And so
so you're doing something that is going to take you a while.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I have time to do this podcast, and I've got, I don't need to be like high energy for the next hour,
Exactly.
So you're willing to spend that hour listening to people talk.
Exactly. And the last negative I put is the idea of tribalism from host perspectives.
Ooh.
And so I'm going to delve into it a bit more later on, but here are basically a list of the podcasts I typically listen to, split them up in 3 categories, and I'm going to try and put them all in the description along with any that Jake recommends that might be different from mine, and what they're about and basically why I listen to them. So obviously the first one, the first category is about knowledge and education. And I have put the Joe Rogan podcast under that.
That's the biggest podcast on earth.
Exactly.
Right
It's probably in both of our lists. It's probably in almost everyone's list if they've listened to a podcast. It's really popular. The reason I put it here is because while he is a comedian and they have a lot of comedians come on, I think they do something unique where they bring in specialists on certain issues to talk about that issue for a long time, like 2 to 3 hours. And that is really interesting. It's hard to get that other places.
Those are his biggest videos.
And to give him credit, he does a great job of letting them talk and asking them engaging questions the whole time. So it's that's pretty much what I like about it, is the specialists that come in on a topic I'm interested in that he talks to. If there's one about, something I don't care about, or if it's another comedian I don't really like, I'm not going to listen to it. But yeah. Next one under knowledge is, I basically lumped all this into one, TED Talks. I listen to a lot of TED Talks for audio.
I'm a big fan of TED Talks.
Yeah, mostly because it's good to see like the data when they put it up there, but in reality, I just want to hear what they say. And so if it's something I'm interested in, kind of falls into the same thing, I'm gonna listen to them. These are kind of the outliers, like comedy and internet focused podcasts. Tiny Meat Gang podcast is hilarious, and I just love listening to them. And Curious with Josh Peck is good as well. He talks to a lot of internet popular people, like on YouTube or on other websites, and he really cares about podcasts. And so a lot of his content is about dissecting podcasts, which is interesting. And the last category, the third category, is storytelling in D&D. So in case you don't know, I play a lot of Dungeons & Dragons. So does Jake. And I probably am the biggest arbiter about it.
Biggest arbiter.
Yeah.
I would definitely give you Chief Arbiter of D&D
Thank
title.
you. So I write it up for all the friends, and they all come over and we play it. And so I always want to make sure I know more and more about it and more about storytelling because I want to write. So I've got down a bunch of these. I'm just going to knock them off. So the Dungeon Cast / Super Quest Saga, they're great for specific topics in terms of like specific monsters, races, or dragons. There's Lore, the podcast Lore, which is great for niche stories that you might not have heard of or different types, very supernatural-esque stories from real life that you can gain inspiration from. Matt Colville, he's really good at teaching people to Dungeon Master, and he's been doing it for a long time. I like to hear the experience from him. Critical Role is really good just because it's a great entertaining campaign. So if you're interested in listening to that, that's, the biggest one almost. But there's tons of them. But I think Critical Role probably does it best. They have the most thematic approach, which is what I like. And WebDM kind of falls in line with Dungeon Cast. They pick out different pieces of the game and analyze them for 30 minutes to an hour. And in WebDM's case, they're probably shorter form. It's usually anywhere from 15 to 30 to 45 minutes. For Dungeon Cast, it's anywhere from 30 to an hour and a half. So just to give an example, like they might have a whole episode about trolls and everything you want to know about a troll. It's in there. So I find that really interesting. Slight caveat, I also listen to a lot of audiobooks, which is great to fill up time like efficiently, and I kind of fall into the same line of thinking because a lot of this content I'm listening to auditorily, is that a word? I just listen.
You listen to it.
I don't watch
over
the
audio.
video.
Yeah, you don't watch the video.
Yeah.
Audio only, auditorily. That's weird.
Yeah. So I consume a lot of podcasts. I'm kind of a scientist myself. And I've basically come up with a hypothesis as to why podcasts exist and they're growing. And so here it is. People want fewer stories and greater depth. It's about time efficiency and downloading knowledge. And to give up some backing to this, I looked up an article about podcast demographics. I don't know the name of the website or the author offhand, but I'm going to provide it in the description along with the list. And so here are some demographics about podcasts. 40% of Americans today have listened to a podcast before or listened to it regularly, which, 4 out of 10 people, that's a pretty big number considering
Well, they've seen
that,
just one though.
well, at least one. So
Yeah.
And the other 60%, it's listed as, I'm not 100%, but it's like has heard of podcasting before at least,
But never watched one.
but never watched one or listened to one.
Okay.
And
So you could safely say 10-15% of America would say, "Oh yeah, I watch podcasts."
definitely.
Interesting.
I think
that's
it's
a big number.
Well, I agree, and I think that it's a big jump from when they were made, when they first came out as the idea of audio blogging from the 80s.
Yes.
And looking deeper into the people listening to them, 85% of people listening to, Americans listening to podcasts are college students.
85% of the people.
85%.
Of that 40% number?
Yeah. I had to infer that. It didn't say specifically.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
it said 85% of podcast listeners. So,
Okay, interesting.
yeah. So, I thought that was really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. So, to tie it back in with my hypothesis, I think it's a movement towards, like, new age education. And,
God, I was writing that down right when you said it.
and
Yes,
getting
100%. It's like 85% of college kids are watching, make up the podcast audience, which shows that, they're hungry for something that they're not already getting.
Exactly.
They don't want to hear from someone with a PhD. They want to hear from the person, if your role model is Elon Musk, do you go listen to your physics professor, or do you go listen to Elon Musk?
Yeah.
You go straight. There's no middleman. There's no some guy's gonna tell you how he did it, or somebody's gonna explain to you what somebody explained to Elon Musk. It's like you can go directly to the source, and you don't have to rely on Fox News, where you have Elon Musk trying to fight a dumb news anchor for 5 minutes of screen time.
Right.
They don't let
and
him
so
talk.
that kind of falls into the idea that podcasts are being preferable for the listener. So the listener can choose what they want to hear. And I think that's good and bad. It's good in that you want to get large sums of information for the thing that you care about, right? But you're only going to hear it from that one person, from that perspective. And so it almost tunnel visions a lot of people, especially hardcore fans of podcasts. The people that are watching the whole Joe Rogan podcast through are really big fans of Joe Rogan. And so anything that he says, likely they're not going to refute it, right? And any disagreements he gets in, it's more likely that they will support him even if he's wrong.
Interesting.
And so it can lead to more education, but also more bad education.
It might, but I think when you compare podcasts to the news, or if you compare it to any other alternative, I think the type of people that watch podcasts are very conscious of what you just said. Yeah. They're conscious of the fact that they're going to be biased towards Joe Rogan, and so because they're trying to make themselves smarter, they know that that's a problem. I think they're less likely to take his side in a disagreement than they would be compared to the people that watch Fox News.
And I would agree with you.
Or CNN. I'm not trying to make a political statement.
Exactly. I would agree with you in that the people watching podcasts, I think, are more, once again, they're majority college students. So I think there's a lot of instilling of college being about varying perspectives. And so it makes a lot of sense that the people listening are going to have a wider viewpoint than just to be tribalistic. But it doesn't change the fact that that still exists and is encouraged by the system in place.
Are we in the tribalism now? Is this it, or is that your next thing?
I'm basically talking about tribalism. The whole time is bias, host bias, and tribalism is, you need to vary the sources of information you're intaking so that you aren't just looking at a piece of the entire pie, basically, of the information pie. So
But what if the rest of the pie is wrong and your piece of the pie is right?
That's what happens. You don't know that. Even if you think
But
that
I feel
very
it,
much.
and I believe it with my whole heart.
Well, facts, you don't believe in facts. Or what is it?
I
Facts
believe
don't
in
care
my
about,
facts.
Facts don't care about your feelings, Ben Shapiro. But even if you just listen to Ben Shapiro, you need to listen to other people, right? It's all about gaining as much information as you can so that you can make your own decision rather than follow another person's view on it. So as for the formula of podcasts, basically, how much time have I got?
You're good.
Okay, real quick.
No, you got 1 minute.
Okay,
60-second rundown. Go.
To finish up with like the formula of podcasts, two people talking, the reason why people think it is popular to college students is that think about whenever you want to talk about a specific important issue. Not only are these podcasts covering niche issues, but they're also covering controversial ones. And if you start talking about a controversial issue, at a certain point, it becomes a large mass of people speaking at once, right? And ideas are being lost in that rabble. And so the idea of two people in an intimate setting talking is, I think, what's attractive, because if you sit there and listen to the whole conversation, the whole hour or 2 hours, people are realizing that, there are, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, golden nuggets of information scattered throughout that entire conversation. Maybe some of it's bad, maybe some of it is good, but there are bits that you would want that develop naturally from people talking in these settings. And so I think that's why it happens. I have written down intimate, real settings encourage honest and fresh ideas.
Like this one.
Exactly.
And that transitions into what I prepared.
Yes,
which is
please.
The
Indulge me.
podcast Wikipedia page and this piece of paper with my pen that I've been writing on for like the past 20 seconds. So
Good job, Jake.
But this is why I wanted you to go first.
Okay.
Because I want to use my time just to kind of I'm still going to use my time.
Okay,
Still
that's
gonna use
fine.
it. But here are the things that I'm just going to build off of what you just said rather than because for me, I don't listen to nearly the amount of things that you listen to.
Yeah, I consume too much audio.
Everything
I have to take time to like be silent for times because I listen to so much.
All the podcasts I listen to fall within the podcasts that you listen to,
Okay.
but your scope is larger, and so I have no. I don't feel like I have extra information to bring, and it's also not a topic that. Well, I don't know. I don't feel like I can talk about it that much from like a numbers perspective. So I can't come here and pull out my data sheets and show you all these things and be like, "Oh, this is how many." I mean, yeah, you can say how many 85% college kids. I like those numbers; those are good.
Thank you.
Anyways, I think we should put in the description of this video all the things that you said and like type out like category 1, category 2, and so pretty much just type out what you have written there.
Yes. Okay.
And then
I will do that.
Also, what you were saying about D&D and how you can go, like you listen to how many podcasts on just D&D? Like 4 or 5?
Well, some of them aren't just on D&D, but most of
Fantasy
them are.
storytelling.
Most of them are, and most of them are for that purpose. So I have written down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, and then if you count audiobooks as well, which
Right.
it's not really for entertainment. I'll be honest. It's for like analyzing stories.
Podcasts themselves, that applies to all subjects. And I love that about podcasts.
Yeah.
Where like if I want to learn about technology, if I want to learn about how to run a business, if I want to learn about adventuring and like traveling the world and different things like that, if there's so many different things that you can learn, and podcasts are an amazing format for it because of that
That long
intimate
standing
conversation.
Yeah.
That's what Jordan Peterson said whenever he was talking to Joe Rogan. He brought up that exact same thing. He was just saying like how refreshing it is to them as Jordan, like for him to get his message out.
Figures.
It's refreshing for him to be able to do it that way rather than have to jump on Fox and then CNN and then MSNBC and then CBS and then try to go through all these people and having 10 people fight over that same window of time.
Right.
Because a guy like Jordan Peterson, they're just gonna he doesn't have time to show that he's
all
correct.
of it. You don't have to show all of it.
Because they can just hit him with buzzwords and then shut him down immediately.
Yeah.
And same thing with Ben Shapiro and same thing with
well, for controversial
all
figures
of
or
them.
people tackling controversial topics, it's definitely better in that you don't get jumped on, right? There's no gang mentality. There's no tribalism, or at least there's less tribalism because you're focusing on what they're saying rather than who they're saying it to, where they're saying it, how many people are there, and who's going to object, right? But also in terms of the non-controversial topics that don't really get a mic to speak into, if you see what I mean. Like, don't get the attention that some people have put towards them.
Oh, you're saying non-church. Okay.
Well, just
I see
niche
what you're
topics,
saying.
niche topics.
I
And
see what
so
you're saying.
a podcast can not only take that specialist on that niche topic, like let's make something up. Let's say we have a surgeon that is amazing at doing surgery on crabs, and he's the best crab surgeon in the world, and he's fantastic. But nobody actually cares about crab surgery. Like, not a single person cares.
I would probably go watch the first 5 minutes, but then I would probably leave.
But what if you really cared about crab surgery? And you're just sitting there on your couch and you're like, but I really want to know about crab surgery.
Well,
then you go to the podcast where the guy sits
Yeah.
there and talks about crab surgery for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And you're invested to the whole thing. That's one of the positives.
yeah. I mean, that's what that is. I like our format because we're able to say, oh, this is your segment and this is my segment, and we can bring our own thing. Like, for your first 15 minutes, it was that was your 15 minutes to do whatever you want with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me right now, I'm not whipping out a whole lot of stuff. I know, I feel bad. I feel like I should, because I say that, I want to bring value to the podcast. Whatever.
What do you think, Jake?
What I think is that this Wikipedia page says that a podcast was originally, the name comes from a radio broadcast in the iPod.
Okay.
So it was a podcast. And so
I didn't know that, actually.
What they wanted to do was they wanted to take something live and they wanted to make it portable.
Yeah.
And so it was the same thing as like you have the radio in your car. Oh, we're going to make it portable and we're going to put it on the iPod.
Yeah.
And so it was the same thing with music that they made happen with the because those on the radio waves existed. They had their music channels and then there was the, like Rush Limbaugh, radio channels. They had
The
their
thing
own radio
that's tough
shows.
about
So hold
radio.
on.
Okay.
So with those two things coming to the forefront at the same time, music and audiophiles, it heightens in the same way. So music before was like you would buy like a record and you would listen to that one record and like you would have a whole collection of records, and so those were the people that you listened to, and that was it. And you weren't able to get like this long form stuff. But once you got music, once you got Spotify, once you got iTunes, you were able to access any music you wanted, no matter where you were in the world or who you knew or what the video store down the corner sold, the vinyl store or whatever sold. It doesn't matter.
On demand.
It's on demand. And so the same thing happens with knowledge, with the broadcasts. I mean, political discussions and discussions about religion, discussions about any topic instantly became highly portable, and I think that's great. I would prefer if our presidential debates actually happened in long form rather than how they do it. The way they do it does not involve intimate conversation at all.
It feels a bit more spectacle.
It's a spectacle. We're gonna crunch them on time, and we're gonna force them to use buzzwords because those are the only words that convey anything that everybody understands. It doesn't take anybody anywhere new. You don't learn anything new if somebody has 5 minutes to explain something. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so if they get 5 minutes and they're just trying to win and they can't teach you anything new, then all they can do is tear down somebody else in 5 minutes rather than teach you why you should go to their side, and that would take like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's so much easier to see who can hit each other harder rather than who can draw people in, because that's so much harder to do.
Yeah.
So I wish that our presidential debates were like this.
Yeah.
Like, I wish there was like a CNN guy and then Donald Trump and then whoever's going to run against him, like Bernie, and there was a long form discussion on what they think should happen for the nation. And to be honest, I'm a conservative. I know that Donald Trump would struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
He would be very, very good in right after the questions are asked of him. But if he has to carry on the conversation for a long time, I don't think that he will be able to convince a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
And lastly,
I can see that.
I don't think very many people would care about that.
It goes into the negatives.
I think you would have low investment from people because people don't want to sit down and actually learn.
Yeah. Well, people just burn out
As much as
they need it fast, you know.
Yeah.
Unless they really care about a topic, they need that information quickly. I mean, think about how many times you've been sitting in class and then you just, without even realizing, started tuning out what they were saying because you maybe wanted to know, but then you just were so tired of listening to them, and then you did, and then you or her, and you just don't, without even realizing, not stop listening because you didn't get the knowledge that you wanted or felt that you need. So now you're just out. It's like the same as changing the channel on the TV or hitting pause or whatever. But yeah.
And politically, the political discussions, and also my biggest audio portable long form things that I listen to that I used to listen to were probably the Jordan Peterson,
Mm-hmm.
Ben Shapiro, Rubin Report, Valuetainment Interviews, London Real, and Joe Rogan for sure. Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha.
So it's
and those kind of follow under the same. Same kind of thing.
It is that batch of people, and I get that. But I mean, I think they're saying the same things that somebody like Fox News would be saying, but the difference is that it's educational because they have like a whole hour to defend why they think that.
Yeah.
And I think that if I did that for for the liberal side of the discussion, and if I listened to that, many hours of that discussion, I might be drawn to that side. But the problem is, I would have to get over that initial hump of
Teams.
getting past the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And actually going to the other side and seeing what they had to say, and not immediately recalling what I've been listening to for the past.
Yeah. Well, it takes discipline. I mean, the whole idea.
It takes discipline, but it also takes you. You have to say both can't be right,
Mm-hmm.
and probably neither are right.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably not just two solutions to every problem, and one's Republican and one's Democrat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's
I can
just
agree.
lunacy to say that there's two solutions every time.
Yeah.
And then it's even more lunacy to say, oh, well, I agree with 55% of these people's solutions, and I agree with 45% of these people's solutions, and so I'm gonna pick the Democrat solution every time.
Mm-hmm.
That means that you're gonna be unhappy with your government 45% of the time, okay?
Yeah.
And that means that the other team is gonna be unhappy 55% of the time. So the whole country, total, it's only happy 10% of the time because we're given so few options.
Yeah. Well,
and so
Dylan-
whenever it comes to podcasts,
Yeah.
and that's what the whole thing is about. Long story short, you're able to explore a lot more options than just two.
Mm-hmm. And what each option really is at the end of it. I mean, there's a lot more detail in each one, and I think that phrase "new age education" is the highlight of it. That's that's what I came across most when looking up like why does this exist and why do people care if two people sit here and talk? Why does that get any attention? It's because they're saying things that you may never have heard before. And you can't get that kind of information from school, from a classroom, or from your university, right? And it's just interesting how that works and how it's taken off to me. And there's so many now. I mean, there's so many. It's been blowing up since not just since its origination. I mean, in recent years with the internet and everything, the whole genre. I mean, you can find a podcast on. If there's something you like, you can probably find a podcast on it. I've found 5 podcast equivalents on storytelling /D&D. So, I mean, you can probably find something that even remotely relates to the format, and that's just what people enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, I think what it really comes down to is the education factor, but it also, when you're looking at college students being the majority listeners, I think one of the bigger factors that play in is time efficiency. And so when you think about college students, there isn't a lot of time for everything, and a lot of things get blown off. And so when you are starting to do something like you're just doing something trivial, like math that doesn't take any energy. If you're sitting there listening to music, that's one thing. If you're sitting there listening to a podcast about something you enjoy, you might learn something that you didn't know. Maybe you think about a problem a different way. Maybe you learn a new mindset. Maybe you get a new fact that you could just share with your friends or some nonsense. Or maybe you learn how to, you hear some keyword or some phrase to something that you want to look up later and jot it down. And then you go look it up later, and that's the future place that you want to be employed at. It's stuff like that, that you can get from long-form detailed information that I think is really valuable. And the only thing that is hard to get over is the idea that there's a tendency of being bored and tuning out, losing focus, and a bit of the tribalism aspect. But I think that kind of plays onto a larger role of just what the internet is like, what people are starting to get like with so many different viewpoints, and who's got the biggest megaphone to shout it out.
Yes. That should be fine. Told me my battery was low, but it can make it 50 more minutes.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, we're good. We're good.
I hope so.
Or else this podcast will not be long form.
Keep talking, Jack. Keep
talking. I just tossed it off to you.
I know you did, but I had to grab my charger just in case.
Okay. Well, here comes more bullshit.
No, don't give him bullshit. Hold on.
There is something that I did think was interesting in that this is gonna get real. We're going off.
Let's do it. Can we go? We're in the last 15 minutes anyways.
Yeah, so how much time we got? Oh, we've got about 10 minutes. Let's do it. So when I think about the whole time efficiency thing, I think of it as like you're downloading information.
Yes.
And not all of it's good. You're listening to people and nonsense, but at a certain level, you are downloading bits of information that you're going to remember while you're doing your other stuff. And so that idea of downloading information, I think I take it very science fiction. Like you plug something in and you're being fed the Wikipedia page on the battle of whatever that you need to know for your test, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about that? That seems a bit like kind of freaky.
What about downloading information?
Yeah.
I mean, I would prefer, okay, how fast can you read?
Not very fast. But I can.
Okay. Let me give you my
process
perspective.
fast.
My perspective is that, starting from when I was in 6th grade, they put me on ADD meds.
Okay.
And so I was hyped up on like Ritalin all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like I was in the library and I was reading, and it was like I read every book in the library. I mean, all the fiction books.
Yeah.
I wasn't reading nonfiction. Oh, I wasn't a freak, you know. But
some weirdo.
But I was, you know, I thought I was naturally good at reading. I mean, the truth is, it was like Ritalin was just, I was all hyped up, and I didn't want to be outside, like, standing around. I wanted to, like, I just wanted information all the time, and I couldn't help
You want
it.
to do things and be productive.
And so that is how, like, the nerd was born in me, and it was all about absorbing information. And so people that shut that out and don't want to absorb information, that's fine. But the people that do, they read. And then there's kind of a gray area where audio is a little slower than reading. But the thing is, it's convenient, and you can do it while you're doing other things, which makes it faster. So if you can do it while you're driving, you can't read a book while you're driving.
Yeah.
You can listen to audio.
That'd
while
be
you're
pretty
driving.
dangerous.
It would be rather dangerous, yes. So that is where the podcast fits in for me. But I think the next level up would be having it be like you could literally download information, like Elon Musk style AI.
Matrix style. You jack into the Matrix.
So that would be where like all podcasts and all information and everything.
Converting raw bits into brain matter.
You might overload. You might die. I don't know. Could you overdose on information?
Well, to give some...
Wait. Could you overdose on information?
Well, I mean, probably, but I think it really depends on how the information's coming in.
Instantaneously and
How do you store that?
Maybe it's all in the cloud. You can see everything, but you don't have to actually know it.
Oh, that'd be cool. That'd be really cool.
Like
and like you have like a processing where like if you need something, like if you think,
instantly know
it pulls it. It pulls it from the
Hey,
cloud
what happened in
information.
1527 on like April 2nd? Oh, let
And
me
it
tell
just
you, at
pops
2
up.
o'clock,
Yeah.
this guy was doing this, and at 3 o'clock, across the world, this guy was doing this, according to this historical guy, and you just...
Bruh, that'd be awesome.
Downloaded.
Every question you'd have on a test wouldn't matter. Because
Well, why
like
would
you
you-
could...
it
I guess why would you ever
completely-
take tests again?
It would completely change education. And you know what? I think podcasts could completely change education as well. And I think 85% of podcast listeners know that.
Yeah.
They know that the podcast itself, they know that is teaching them more about the world than their professors are.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely focused on, what's happening today rather than... I think generally their podcasts are focused more on current events.
I need to cover myself real quick. They're not learning more from the world, from the podcast than their professors long term. But given 1 hour of your time, they can learn more from listening to the expert than they can from listening to their professor.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, definitely listen
Keep
to
going
your
with what you're
professors.
saying. I just wanted to put that in.
Yeah, definitely listen to your professors because they're going to teach you the tools that you need to graduate if you're a college student, or a high school, I guess, any student. But yeah, I think that generally most podcasts seem to be centered around current events because it's very, relevant. It's what's happening today. You need to know what you need. You need to know about these topics in depth enough to have a conversation if it ever comes up, but you can't sit there and study it for days on end.
No, you can't.
So I think that's where the podcast idea comes in, where these people that are proficient in these areas, right, they come in and talk about this issue and give the varying viewpoints. You might have to look at multiple stuff.
Or it's
on that whole
comedy,
thing.
or it's about cooking, or it's about politics, or literally anything.
It's very modern. It's a very modern idea.
We could make a podcast about podcasts.
We could. Well, I'm pretty confident that Josh Peck beat us to that because his podcast, Curious with Josh Peck, is
That's
mostly
what that whole thing's about.
It's mostly centered around people that do podcasts and people that do internet content.
Wow.
So
I want to get super niche with our podcast.
Yeah.
Like I want the once we do our initial 10 that we have written down, which we're probably gonna follow through for all those because those are the ones that we immediately wanted to do. But after that, I would really like if we could go super in depth. Like I'm talking crab surgery in depth.
Crab surgery in depth. Let's get a T-shirt.
I want to talk about. I want the title of the video to be something that most people don't know about. Like I want people to read the title and say, "What?
Yeah.
That's a thing."
Okay.
So I'm just.
That's not a bad idea.
It's the podcast on
It's the
podcasts. So I'm
podcast
talking about
on
our podcast on the podcast on podcasts.
Podcast? Yeah.
How do you like them apples?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's good. And I think that's what a lot of things are doing nowadays. Everything is not only becoming specialized on a global scale, but in terms of the internet, in terms of this specific type podcasts, everything is finding its niche. I mean, how do you think I was able to find 5 different audio things on storytelling D&D? And I'll tell you what, they're all distinctive and do their own different thing. And each one is their own take.
Well, and you're passionate. And
I'm passionate about it. But
you get energy from that and you seek that out.
Yeah. I listened to one today that was like an hour on specifically blue dragons. And like everything that I needed to know about a blue dragon. And I'm like, wow, I know a lot about blue dragons right now. But how much am I going to use that day to day? Probably not a lot, but if I ever want to use a blue dragon in a book or in a D&D campaign, I'm going to know a lot about blue dragons.
You'll know whatever your brain decides that it needs to keep after today.
Fair enough.
Like
there is a lot of dumping.
So much dumping. But with the automatic download that we're going to have, our kids are going to have, they're going to have the AI. It's going to be hooked to the cloud.
Yeah.
It's going to be, there's going to be no more use for dumping. They're just going to, it's like, I need to know.
Every single thing is the same relevance because it's all immediately accessible for whatever you're doing.
Well, you don't have to, the dumping is only important if you have a scarcity of storage. If you store things on the cloud, there's no point in dumping because anytime you need something, you just know it.
Well, to get a bit deeper into that, is there a scarcity in the cloud or is it?
No, I'm talking about scarcity in your brain. Like, there's only so much that you can know.
Yeah. They have a thing for that in the tabletop game Shadowrun called Dump Shock, I think it's called, where you go unconscious after, if you're jacked into something, it's their whole Matrix thing. If you lose your little battle or whatever in it, because it's a game, of course, and it's all
it's like Ender's Game.
If you
sort of
kind of like that.
Sort of.
If you are killed in there, your brain overloads because it's a sensation that it can't
fathom.
Exactly.
Because it actually gives you the sensation of dying, so you
dump
actually
shock.
die.
Just the same as when you're tapped into if you have a drone and you're tapped into it and it dies, you go into dump shock is what they call it, because you're dumped with all of the information it had and all the information of what death is like, but you can't fathom it, so you go unconscious or stunned or whatever for a period of time. That could theoretically be a real thing.
It's a ways off though, because
I don't think we'll be alive for it.
The reason it's a ways off is because it requires that we constantly get smarter in order to develop that kind of technology in the first place. Like, we had no idea the amount of things that have to go right in order to create something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're a good ways there with the internet itself. So, like, the cloud exists, and then our brains exist, and so how do we need to just connect them? I mean, but that itself is going to be a problem that's going to take as long to develop as the internet itself.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I'm going to do my wrap up. Can I do my wrap up?
Go ahead.
Okay, wait, no.
Wrap it up.
No, you finish your point. Well, you wrap it up and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, but to get a bit more micro about podcasts, obviously we really like podcasts. We see the potential, and we want y'all to know as listeners that, one, we appreciate y'all listening to us, obviously. Drop a like and a comment and share it with your friends. But we also think that varying your points of input is important. And so I'm going to be sharing all of these that I listen to, and I hope that you guys in the comments share what you might listen to or watch for whatever it might be, whether it's educational or whether it's for whatever your passion is. We'd be really interested to see that stuff. And it's all about, like we were talking about with the internet, sharing communication so that we can all be lifted up together. So yeah, that's really what I've got.
Wholesome.
It's very wholesome. Happy sunset ending for the podcast today.
Yes. And then my wrap up. I know we're pretty good on time.
We nailed that. Honestly, what's up? We did it. Okay, keep going.
Just for my little 60-second wrap up, should be a 47-minute video. But podcasts themselves are just a piece of the larger picture of downloading technology to your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And just storing information and retrieving it. And I think when you're looking to see what kind of podcast you're going to listen to, it's less about, I need to go find this very specific information. Because if you're going to do that, go on Wikipedia and hit Control F. And just go ahead and go straight to the source, and then go to where the source is at the bottom. Words are going to be so much better for that because you can see like the whole thing, and you can look for specific words. But if you use a podcast, you know how hard it is to find a specific word in a podcast?
That's fair.
It's incredibly difficult. So the idea of the podcast itself is submerging yourself in information and allowing it to, like, as you come out of it, some of it sticks on.
Yeah.
And
Kinda, yeah.
It's up to you to determine which information you think is the most valuable to you and which podcast you're going to listen to, and then what out of that podcast you will allow to stick to you as you leave that podcast. So definitely be smart about what you submerge yourself in, and submerge yourself in many things.
All right. Well, anything else?
That's it.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see y'all next time.